The Nightmare Maestro invites you to embark on a journey into the depths of human fear. Picture this: 5 strangers boarding a fishing charter, unaware that one among them harbors a dark secret. As the boat leaves port, an unsettling question lingers in the air. Is someone else hiding on board? The Atlantic Voyager, a 65-foot deep-sea fishing vessel, bobbed gently at the dock as Captain John Thornton waited for his passengers. The salty breeze carried the promise of adventure, but a faint undercurrent of unease tinged the air. 5 individuals approached, their excitement palpable as they lugged their gear onto the deck. Anne, a corporate lawyer in her 40s, was the first to arrive. Her polished exterior belied a deep-seated need for escape from her high-pressure life. Next came Tom and Angela, a middle-aged couple hoping to rekindle their relationship through this shared experience. Jim, a grizzled veteran in his 60s, nodded curtly as he boarded, his weathered hands speaking of countless hours spent battling the sea. Finally, there was Oliver, a 20-something thrill-seeker with an easygoing smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. As the group settled in, Captain John's first mate, Danny, a wiry man with piercing blue eyes, began the safety briefing. The passengers listened with varying degrees of attention, their minds already drifting to the open ocean and the promise of record-breaking catches. The engines roared to life, and the Atlantic Voyager pulled away from the harbor. The coastline slowly receded, buildings shrinking until they were mere specks on the horizon. As the vast expanse of the ocean enveloped them, an imperceptible shift occurred in the atmosphere. The excitement of departure gave way to a creeping sense of isolation. Unknown to the passengers, in the shadows of the ship's hold, something stirred, a faint scratching sound, easily dismissed as the groan of the ship's hull echoed in the darkness. As the Atlantic Voyager charted its course into the open sea, it carried with it an unseen presence, one that would soon shatter the illusion of a peaceful fishing trip. As the first day at sea drew to a close, the passengers of the Atlantic Voyager retired to their cabins, exhausted but content from hours of fishing. The gentle rocking of the boat and the rhythmic hum of the engines lulled them into a false sense of security. But as night fell, the air grew thick with an intangible tension. Anne woke with a start, her heart racing. She could have sworn she heard footsteps outside her cabin door, too light to be one of her fellow passengers. Holding her breath, she strained her ears, but the sound had vanished. Dismissing it as a dream, she tried to settle back to sleep, but a nagging feeling of being watched kept her on edge. In the galley, Jim rummaged for a late-night snack. As he reached for a bag of chips, his hand brushed against something warm and sticky. Pulling back in disgust, he flicked on the light to find a half-eaten sandwich, still fresh, sitting on the counter. Confusion furrowed his brow. Hadn't Danny cleaned up after dinner? Tom and Angela's peaceful slumber was interrupted by a sudden crash from the deck above. Tom volunteered to investigate, leaving Angela alone in their cabin. As he climbed the stairs, the boat seemed to grow larger, more ominous. On deck, he found a fishing rod lying on the ground, its line tangled. The sea breeze carried a whisper, almost like a distant laugh, sending a shiver down his spine. Oliver, unable to sleep, decided to take a walk around the boat. As he passed the storage room, he noticed the door slightly ajar. Peering inside, he saw nothing amiss, but couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. It was as if someone had been through their supplies, leaving everything slightly out of place. Captain John, taking the night watch, noticed a series of small, unexplained events. Equipment moved from its usual spot, unusual sounds echoing through the ship's corridors, and a persistent feeling of another presence on board. As an experienced sailor, he knew the tricks the mind could play after days at sea. But this felt different, more tangible. As dawn broke, the passengers gathered in the galley, exchanging uneasy glances. No one wanted to be the first to voice their concerns, to admit that something felt off. But as they sipped their coffee and picked at their breakfast, the weight of unspoken fears hung heavy in the air. The vast ocean stretched out around them, beautiful yet indifferent, hiding whatever secrets the Atlantic voyager might hold. The third day at sea brought with it a suffocating tension. What had begun as subtle unease now blossomed into full-blown paranoia. The passengers and crew of the Atlantic voyager found themselves eyeing one another with suspicion, each innocuous action suddenly laden with potential threat. Anne, usually composed, started at every creak and groan of the ship. She caught herself analyzing her fellow passengers' behavior, searching for signs of deception. When Oliver offered to refill her coffee, she hesitated, irrationally wondering if he might slip something into her cup. Jim's military training kicked in, his instincts screaming that something was amiss. He began taking inventory of potential weapons, a filleting knife in the galley, a heavy flashlight in his cabin. His eyes constantly scanned his surroundings, muscles tense, ready to react to an unseen threat. Tom and Angela's attempt at rekindling their relationship crumbled under the weight of fear. Every moment apart bred wild speculation. When Tom returned late from a solo fishing session, Angela's mind raced with horrific scenarios. Was he the one hiding something? Or had he fallen victim to the mysterious presence on board? Oliver's easygoing demeanor cracked, revealing a nervous energy beneath. He became hyper-aware of his own actions, afraid that any misstep might cast suspicion on him. His attempts to lighten the mood with jokes fell flat, met with wary stares rather than laughter. Captain John struggled to maintain order as the atmosphere on board deteriorated. He overheard whispered conversations, saw accusing glances exchanged when people thought no one was looking. Even his trusted first mate, Danny, seemed on edge, double-checking locked doors and speaking in hushed tones. The fishing, once the focus of the trip, became an afterthought. Lines were cast half-heartedly, catches barely acknowledged. Instead, the passengers found themselves drawn into a silent game of cat and mouse, each person simultaneously hunter and hunted. As night fell, no one wanted to be alone. The galley became an unspoken gathering point. The passengers and crew huddled together under harsh fluorescent lights. Sleep, when it came, was fitful and plagued by nightmares. In the darkness of the hold, something shifted. A shadow detached itself from the deeper blackness, moving with deliberate slowness. The intruder, whether real or a manifestation of collective fear, was biding its time. The Atlantic voyager sailed on, a crucible of fear floating in the vast, uncaring sea. On the fourth day, as a storm brewed on the horizon, the simmering tension aboard the Atlantic voyager finally boiled over. The catalyst was a simple discovery, innocuous in any other context. But here it sparked a powder keg of fear and accusation. Anne, seeking solitude from the oppressive atmosphere in the galley, decided to organize her belongings. As she rummaged through her duffel bag, her hand struck something unfamiliar. Pulling it out, she found herself holding a worn leather wallet. Her breath caught in her throat as she opened it, revealing a driver's license with an unfamiliar face. The name read Daniel Reeves. Her scream brought the others running. As Anne explained her discovery, the implications hung heavy in the air. Someone had planted this wallet in her bag, or had Anne herself brought it on board for some nefarious purpose? Accusations flew thick and fast. Jim, his face flushed with anger, demanded that everyone submit to a search. Tom protested, arguing that this would only breed more suspicion. Angela, tears streaming down her face, begged Captain John to turn the boat around and head back to shore. Oliver, uncharacteristically quiet, stood apart from the group. His eyes darted between his fellow passengers, calculating, assessing. When questioned about his silence, his explanation of shock rang hollow to the others' ears. Captain John, struggling to maintain control, ordered Danny to do a thorough sweep of the ship. As Danny disappeared into the bowels of the vessel, the remaining group fell into an uneasy silence, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Anne clutched the wallet like a talisman, her knuckles white. Jim paced the deck, his hand straying to the knife at his belt. Tom held Angela close, whispering reassurances that sounded empty, even to his own ears. When Danny finally returned, his face was ashen. In a shaky voice, he reported his findings: a makeshift bed hidden in a rarely used storage compartment, along with food wrappers and a half-empty water bottle. The implications were clear. Someone had indeed been hiding on the ship. As if on cue, a loud thud echoed from below deck, followed by the sound of running feet. The storm chose that moment to break, rain lashing the boat as lightning illuminated the scene in stark, terrifying flashes. In the chaos that followed, accusations turned to action. The passengers and crew, armed with whatever makeshift weapons they could find, began a frantic search of the ship. The Atlantic Voyager became a floating, haunted house, each shadowy corner potentially concealing the mysterious Stowaway. Oliver, his face a mask of determination, took charge with unexpected authority. "We need to search in pairs," he commanded, his voice cutting through the panic. "Anne, you're with me. Jim, go with Tom and Angela. Danny, stay with the captain." For a brief moment, Anne caught a glimpse of something in Oliver's eyes, a hardness that seemed at odds with his previously carefree demeanor. But in the frenzy of the moment, the observation slipped away, lost in the storm of fear and suspicion that engulfed the Atlantic Voyager. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the Atlantic Voyager in harsh, stuttering flashes. Rain lashed the deck as the passengers and crew, soaked to the bone, continued their desperate search. The boat pitched and rolled beneath their feet, as if trying to shake loose the secrets hidden in its depths. Anne, clutching a flare gun borrowed from the emergency kit, inched her way down the narrow corridor leading to the engine room. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps, barely audible over the rumble of the storm and the pounding of her heart. Jim, his military training kicking in, took point as they approached the galley. His eyes darted from shadow to shadow, the filleting knife in his white-knuckled grip reflecting the lightning flashes. Behind him, Tom and Angela huddled close, armed with a fire extinguisher and a heavy flashlight, respectively. Oliver had volunteered to search the upper deck with Danny, while Captain John manned the bridge, keeping a watchful eye on both the storm and his passengers. The tension was palpable, a living thing that twisted through the ship like poisonous smoke. A crash from the galley sent the search party rushing forward. Jim burst through the door, knife raised, to find Oliver standing amidst a scatter of fallen pots and pans. The young man's eyes were wide, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "I saw someone," Oliver stammered, pointing towards the walk-in freezer. "A shadow. It went in there." Jim approached the freezer door. The others closed behind. With a nod to Tom, who raised the fire extinguisher, Jim yanked the door open. A blast of frigid air hit them, along with a scream that cut through the storm's fury. Huddled in the corner, shivering violently, was a man. His clothes were ragged, his beard unkempt. Wild eyes darted between the shocked faces of the passengers. Daniel Reeves, Anne breathed, recognizing the face from the driver's license. The stowaway lunged forward suddenly, desperation lending him strength. He barreled past the stunned group, knocking Anne aside. Her fingers squeezed the trigger of the flare gun reflexively. The flare shot past Daniel's head, exploding against the far wall in a shower of sparks. Chaos erupted. Jim tackled Daniel to the ground, the two men grappling on the tilting floor of the galley. Tom moved to assist, but a particularly violent wave sent him crashing into Angela. The fire extinguisher flew from his grasp, clanging against the metal cabinets. Anne scrambled to her feet, aiming the now empty flare gun at the wrestling figures. Oliver stood frozen, his face a mask of shock, and something else, a fleeting expression that, had anyone been looking, might have raised questions. Before Daniel could break free, Oliver's voice cut through the tension. "He's lying." All eyes turned to the young man, who stood apart from the group, his face a mask of grim determination. "There's no they. Is there, Daniel?" Recognition flashed in Daniel's eyes, followed quickly by fear. Oliver reached into his pocket, his movements deliberate and practiced. "Oliver Reynolds," he stated, his tone clipped and professional. "You're under arrest, Daniel." The revelation hit like a physical blow. Anne lowered the flare gun, her mind reeling. "You're law enforcement," she managed, the pieces starting to fall into place. Oliver's keen observations, his unexpected authority during the search. Oliver nodded grimly. "I've been tracking him. When I realized he'd stowed away on this boat, I had to act fast. I couldn't risk tipping him off." A bitter laugh erupted from Daniel. "Oh, that's Rich, the noble lawman, here to save the day. Why don't you tell them the rest, Oliver? About the money, about your partner." Oliver's face hardened. "Shut up, Reeves. It's over." Captain John's voice crackled over the ship's intercom, urgent and tinged with fear. "All hands on deck. Brace for impact." The warning came too late. With a deafening crash, the Atlantic Voyager struck something solid. The impact sent everyone sprawling. In the moment of stunned silence that followed, the sound of rushing water filled the air. As the passengers struggled to their feet, the reality of their situation began to sink in. They were taking on water, stranded in a storm-tossed sea, with a desperate fugitive in their midst. The hunt was over, but their true ordeal was just beginning. Water sloshed around their ankles as the Atlantic Voyager listed dangerously to one side. The storm's fury seemed to intensify, as if nature itself was conspiring to keep the boat's secrets hidden beneath the waves. In the galley, a tableau of fear and confusion played out in the flickering emergency lights. Daniel Reeves, the stowaway, lay pinned beneath Jim's weight. His eyes darted wildly between the faces surrounding him, a cornered animal seeking escape. Anne, her hands shaking, trained the empty flare gun on him, more for her own comfort than any real threat. "Start talking," Jim growled, pressing his forearm against Daniel's throat. "Who are you? Why are you here?" Daniel's laugh was a broken, desperate sound. "You don't understand. None of you do. I had to hide. They're after me. They'll kill me if they find me." "Who?" Tom demanded, helping Angela to her feet. "Who's after you?" Oliver, his face set in grim lines, moved closer. "There's no they, Daniel. Stop lying. These people deserve the truth after what you've put them through." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "The truth. You want to talk about truth, Oliver?" Why don't you tell them about the money? About what really happened to your partner?" Oliver's jaw clenched, a muscle twitching beneath the skin. "This isn't about me, Reeves. It's over. You're under arrest." The boat groaned ominously, tilting further. Captain John's voice crackled over the intercom once more. "We're going down. Everyone, life vests, on and to the deck, now." As the group scrambled to follow orders, the hidden currents of deception that had run beneath the surface of their journey finally burst into the open. Oliver moved to cuff Daniel, but the fugitive wasn't done fighting. With a sudden surge of strength, he shoved Oliver aside and bolted for the door. Jim moved to intercept, but a violent wave sent him crashing into Tom and Angela. Daniel slipped past, disappearing into the storm-lashed darkness of the deck. Oliver cursed and gave chase, leaving the others to follow in confused desperation. On deck, rain and sea spray made visibility near zero. Captain John and Danny were struggling with the life raft, their shouts barely audible over the howling wind. Anne caught a glimpse of Daniel, a dark shape against the churning sea, as he reached the railing. "Stop!" Oliver's voice rang out. He stood a few feet from Daniel, his gun drawn. "It's over, Daniel. Don't make this worse." Daniel turned, his face illuminated by a flash of lightning. His expression was one of absolute despair. "Worse? How could it be worse? You took everything from me, Oliver. Everything." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Daniel vaulted over the railing just as Oliver lunged forward. Their hands met for a brief moment before both men disappeared over the side, swallowed by the raging sea. Anne's scream was lost in the storm as the others rushed to the railing. In the churning waters below, they caught glimpses of a struggle, but in the chaos of wind and waves, it was impossible to tell who was who. A head broke the surface, gasping for air, before being dragged under again. Then nothing. As Captain John ushered them towards the life raft, the full weight of what had transpired began to settle on the survivors. Their fishing trip had become a crucible of fear and deception, stripping away the veneer of civilization and exposing the raw, often ugly truth of human nature. The life raft inflated with a hiss, a tiny island of hope in a sea of despair. As they clambered aboard, each passenger carried with them not just the physical trauma of their ordeal, but the psychological scars of trust betrayed and reality upended. And beneath it all, a gnawing uncertainty about what had really happened on the Atlantic Voyager. Dawn broke over a calmer sea, the storm having spent its fury through the night. The life raft bobbed gently on the swells, its occupants huddled together in exhausted silence. The Atlantic Voyager was gone, leaving behind only debris and unanswered questions. Anne sat at the edge of the raft, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The events of the past week played through her mind on an endless loop. Every assumption she'd made, every judgment, now cast in a new and unsettling light. Jim's gruff voice broke the silence. "We were pawns, all of us." His weathered face was etched with a mixture of anger and resigned acceptance. "Used as cover for what? A manhunt? A heist gone wrong?" "We don't know that for sure," Tom interjected, though his tone lacked conviction. Maybe Oliver was telling the truth about being law enforcement. Angela, huddled against Tom, spoke up. "But what about what Daniel said? About money and Oliver's partner? There's so much we don't know." Captain John, his captain's hat long lost to the sea, shook his head slowly. "And we might never know. Oliver, Daniel, they're gone, along with whatever truth they might have told." A bitter laugh escaped Anne's lips. "Truth? I'm not sure I'd recognize it anymore." She turned to face the others, her eyes haunted. "We spent days suspecting each other, jumping at shadows, and all along the real threat was, what? A criminal, a corrupt cop, both. Danny, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. Maybe that's the real horror of it all, not knowing, never being sure who to trust, what to believe. His words hung heavy in the air, a truth more chilling than the sea breeze that ruffled their hair. Each person on the raft reflected on their own actions over the past week. The suspicions, the accusations, the moments of weakness and fear. So what now? Angela's voice was barely above a whisper. How do we go back to normal after this? How do we trust again? The question remained unanswered as a distant humming grew louder. Heads turned to see a Coast Guard helicopter approaching, its appearance almost surreal after days of isolation and fear. As the helicopter drew closer, its downdraft whipping the sea into a frenzy, the survivors prepared for rescue. But even as hope bloomed for their physical salvation, each knew that part of them would remain adrift, lost in the turbulent waters of doubt and disillusionment. The Nightmare Maestro's voice, a ghostly whisper beneath the helicopter's roar, left a final chilling thought. In the end, the greatest horror lies not in the unknown depths or the raging storms, but in the uncharted territories of the human heart. For it is there that trust can turn to suspicion, friendship to betrayal, and certainty to doubt in the blink of an eye. As the rescue ladder descended from the helicopter, the survivors of the Atlantic Voyager grasped it like a lifeline. They would return to the world they knew, but forever changed. The horror they had experienced would cling to them like the salt on their skin, a constant reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones we create in our own minds, and that the full truth can be as elusive as a shadow in the depths of the sea. The Nightmare Maestro's tale draws to a close, leaving you, the listener, to ponder. What unseen currents run beneath the surface of your own life? What secrets lurk in the hearts of those around you? And when pushed to the edge, what darkness might you find within yourself? In a world where truth can be as shifting as the tides, can we ever truly know those around us, or even ourselves? Subscribe for more chilling tales from the Nightmare Maestro.